In Kenshi, your first experience of new people is most likely going to be violent. If it's bandits wanting your food, or slave traders wanting you to work in the mines, either way, they're going to try and kill you. As soon as you've got the funds, you're going to want a weapon, but with so many to choose from, it can be quite daunting to pick one. So let's take a look at the weapons in Kenshi and all their primary uses. Before we get into the weapon types, it's important we look into the weapon damages and their statistics. There are three main ones: cut damage, blunt damage, and blood loss. Cut damage indicates how much damage will cut the enemy, causing blood loss. Blunt damage determines how much health will be taken from the enemy's body part, and blood loss determines how much blood will be taken from damage. There are 6 melee weapons in Kenshi: katanas, sabres, heavy weapons, hackers, blunts, and polearms. Even though there are crossbows and martial arts, I'll give them their own video as they are quite unique compared to the others. Let's start with katanas. Katanas are the most common weapon in the game, as not only do they serve a multitude of purposes, they're a jack of all trades when it comes to combat. They are primarily an aggressive combat type of weapon, but all of them giving buffs of attacks and debuffs to defense with the alteration of 1. The topper is the only katana with no debuffs or buffs, it's being a heavy katana which has a tiny bit of blunt damage. The rest of the katanas do no blunt damage, but heavy cut damage and blood loss. All katanas have 10% buff damage against humans, but a 40% debuff to attacks against robots. A nice all-around weapon. Sabres are pretty much the opposite of katanas, while having debuffs to attack but buffs to defense. They're heavier weapons, which leads them to having blunt damage, but lack good buffs really to attack. The standout weapons of the sabres is the Desert Sabre, with them having massive buffs to damaging spiders, bone dogs, and skimmers. Spiders and skimmers can be found mainly in the desert, while bone dogs can be found everywhere. The rest have neutral to positive cut damage, while all of them have a slight blunt damage, which makes them a nice fighting weapon for any opponent. They can be found on Starvit bandit leaders and dust bandits, are duelist weapons, or for characters that don't like to be hit much. Heavy weapons. Heavy weapons are brutal tools that lean on strength and brute force to deal damage. All heavy weapons have a strength requirement to use them properly, and they're also quite heavy themselves, so using them on a fresh character can be tricky. They are one of 2 weapon types that have to have 2 hands to use, which means if one of your arms get crippled, you have to use a backup weapon. The standout weapon of the heavies is the Falling Sun, debatably the best weapon in the game. It deals massive cut and blunt damage while having big attack buffs to beak things, gorillas, and even leviathans if you want to take them on. The others rely on massive blunt damage with no buffs or debuffs. They should not be used inside as they suffer a -6 attack when in buildings. Heavy weapons should only be used by strong characters, and their primary use is for massive damage and crowd control as they can reliably hit multiple enemies with their long reach. They can be found mainly on Shek warriors, but the Falling Sun can be acquired by killing and looting skeleton suicide units. Hackers are nerds who use computers for good or bad means. Hackers in Kenshi are tools of mutilation and destruction. They are a form of a hybrid between a heavy weapon and a sabre, giving a balance between cut damage and blunt damage. The standout weapon of the hackers is the Flesh Cleaver, the main choice of weapon for the cannibal tribes. They have an additional buff to damage against humans. All of the cleavers have a 20% buff to robot damage, but -10% to animals. The main users of these weapons are the holy nations who wield the Paladin's Cross with their hatred for skeletons, which explains the buff towards them. The others are the cannibals who use cleavers to carve humans into meat, so it's best to stay away from them. The cleavers are a great weapon for smashing the limbs of humans and killing robots, but it can be a bit tricky to get the hang of, just like heavy weapons. Blunt weapons are the most common among starting areas, as starving bandits and Holy Nation servants carry iron sticks as the main offence. They are crude items that focus on disabling the enemy instead of outright killing them. The standout weapons of the blunt are the jits, if I'm saying that right. Forged blunt tools that specialise in defence, giving a massive +8 to defence, while only having 1 debuff to inside attacks. Most blunt weapons have a neutral to positive attack rating while they're inside, and have next to no cutting damage, making them great weapons for pacifists or prison guards. The club weapons have a -10% to animals, but you really shouldn't be hunting animals with sticks anywhere. You can find blunt weapons from beginner level enemies and clubs on slaving guilds around the map. This weapon should only be used as a backup for heavy weapons or for pacifists, but if you're playing a pacifist, why are you playing Kenshi? Polearms are probably the most unique weapons in the game, as their main use is for killing animals. They have massive reach and the only other weapon than heavies that require 2 arms to use. The standout weapon of the polearms is the staff. The staff is the only polearm that does next to no bleed damage and is a massive blunt wooden stave. Its benefits is a massive +8 to attack with a staggering reach. These can be found on holy farmers as they are poor and cannot afford properly made weapons. All polearms suffer a moderate penalty to damage while inside, but with their reach they are very good combat sticks because of the high bleed damage on the others. Almost all of the hive villages and outposts have staffs as their main weapon. Their main use should be for hunting only, as their buffs make it their primary target. That's all the weapons and their uses. For beginners, I would recommend sabres for their defense in the early game, but as you get more confident and venture out into the world, you can choose any weapon you want. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you have any questions about the game, any question about Kenshi, or what your favourite weapon is. Thanks, and remember to have a good one.